Hi, this is Rachel Arbuckle, and you are here to hear from Will Yarborough. I'll start by introducing myself. Rachel Arbuckle, I am the founder and CEO of 2000 Paces Photo Organizing. Our corporate office is here in San Diego, California, but we work with clients all over the country and all over the world, providing solutions to make sure that your photos are organized and preserved for generations to enjoy. But I am here today as a member of the advisory board of the photo managers, and I am beyond thrilled to introduce our key speaker for this session, Will Yarborough. We met a few years ago when I was looking for some solutions for my network, for our millions of photos and many clients that we're trying to help, and I was just at a loss. And Will has this amazing dynamic personality, and I watched one of his YouTube videos, and his channel is right there in the chat. You should check it out. And I was just totally blown away. And so we've been working together the last few years, so you're really in for a treat. Let me just tell you that Will is an engineer by training. He has his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from North Carolina State University, and he spent several years actually working in the aerospace industry before deciding to pursue the company Yarborough Technologies full time. Besides tinkering with servers, Will enjoys cooking, golfing, and playing video games. He's a lot of fun, so it is my genuine and sincere honor to introduce Will Yarborough.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, backstory about me is I kind of servers were always a hobby of mine, and they kind of got out of control, and so now I am where I'm at. I originally just kind of started a YouTube channel, learning how to make tutorials, and what did I know? I knew file servers, and then it kind of spiraled into a full-time business, setting up like kind of small business and home user IT solutions, and so I've been doing that full time with my wife for about 2 years now, actually, which is kind of crazy. And today I'm going to be talking about really simplifying the entire process down of just overall file storage with specific regard to photos. I'm going to keep it fairly simple. I mostly work on these things called NASs, which are much larger file servers that actually allow you to store terabytes and terabytes of data. And we're going to talk about that towards the end, but I kind of wanted to start this off really focusing on somebody who's got like a few terabytes of files and how to handle it, how to back it up, how to organize it, and how to make sure you know what is where and all those things. Because honestly, storage is intimidating, and it's one of those things where you can end up with 70 hard drives in different drawers around your house and know where nothing ever is. And I kind of just want to talk about mistakes that you should not be making and overall how you should operate and when it's time to grow from different sizes of drives and things like that. So, as I said, I've got that YouTube channel. I will absolutely, if you're looking at more advanced stuff, especially with larger file servers and NAS, check me out on YouTube, SpaceRex. But this is really going to be focused on your much smaller use cases for your like single direct attached storage, external hard drives, and kind of focusing on that because I think that's a place where, honestly, the vast majority of people are when they're working with family photo libraries. Because it's pretty hard to get a family photo library over 20 terabytes. Now, with video and stuff, it's possible. But in general, external drives and one off drives are a way easier place to start, and in a lot of cases, can actually meet the storage needs that you need. So it just kind of keeps it a lot easier. Okay, so we kind of want to start with these guys right here. These are the standard drives that you're used to. Got an SSD and a mechanical hard drive. And I think that for most people, if you've got under maybe 15 terabytes, this is absolutely the place to start. Because honestly, you can get hard drives now that are 20 terabytes in space, even 24 terabytes in space, and they're so much easier to use. There's some downsides with them that we'll kind of talk about with NASs later on this video or in this live stream, but kind of focusing on for just this super simple, easy to get started, what do you need? Okay, so most people are probably familiar with something like this. This is a standard external drive, and they come in two different ways. There are SSDs, which is what this is, And then there are mechanical hard drives, which is what this is. There are kind of pros and cons to each of them. And in most cases, SSDs probably make the most amount of sense. So SSDs don't have any mechanical components to them at all. It is just little circuit boards in there. So because of that, they're actually a lot more robust to getting knocked around and things like that. And they also are way faster and way more lightweight. And because they don't have any of those moving parts, they are much more durable. So the downside with SSDs is you only can get about 4 terabytes on them. For a lot of people, that is a ton of space. So for most people, that's not too big of a deal. But if you're looking for more than 4 terabytes, that's when you want to start looking into something like this. This happens to be a hard drive that is outside of a case, but they make hard drives that actually have cases that you can plug into your computer just like a SSD. And the advantage of hard drives is they're much cheaper, especially per terabyte you want, and they go up to massive sizes. You can get 24 terabyte external hard drives and just have it in a form factor about this size, which is really nice to have. And so I think a great place for a lot of people to start is to have a photo drive. I really like having a single point for all files to live because I think otherwise you're always going to get disorganized and lost. So one really common mistake people are going to make that I'm going to talk about later on in this video and this live stream is that a lot of people want to like upgrade to a larger drive and then just start fresh. So say you're the family's photographer, you've got everything in Lightroom, and you've got this drive that has what 100 gigs of space left, and you've been using it since 2019. Well, you're going to call that drive 2019 to 2024 and then get a new bigger drive and start fresh there, knowing that if you ever need to, you can go back to that drive and grab the files. And I really want to dissuade people from doing that because of a few key issues with just storing drives and organization. So my goal for you in general is when that time does arise, when you do start running out of space on your drive, I would really recommend getting a new, bigger drive and actually copying all the files from the smaller drive to the bigger drive, and always keep what I like to call a single source of truth. So if you start splitting your photos and your files across multiple drives, you start losing which one is the true source of truth, and it becomes harder to back up and maintain and know that everything's in working order. So while it's really tempting to just be able to expand and add in more drives, that is going to be the first mistake I'm really going to recommend most people do not make, is have multiple drives that store their photos. Because once you start splitting your critical files across multiple drives, not only do you forget which photo is on which drive, you also kind of lose the ability to easily back them up and check on them. And I want to talk about that later, but one thing that a lot of people don't understand is if you just stick a drive in a drawer, they're not really designed to just not be used for a year. Especially mechanical hard drives, they have moving components in there and lubricants and a ton of things like that that actually need to be run at a somewhat regular interval. And if you just leave it in a drawer for a year or two, it becomes more and more likely that when you go to grab the files off of it, they might not be readable, which is the real reason why when you're upgrading your drives, try to keep everything on one drive. And especially with the ability to have those massive 24 terabyte drives, I would think for most people, that's absolutely attainable. Okay, so that is the basics of kind of where to stick your files. We're really going to be focusing on kind of a local setup where you can put your hands on it, you can see it, you know where your files are. There's a lot of options when it comes to like cloud storage and Google Drive and Dropbox. And while these can be great, they also can be very hard to manage and keep track of, and can often also kind of putting your trust in somebody else. I'm a big fan of actually having my data and seeing it and being able to put my hands on it. But when you do that, another really important concept that you need to understand is all mechanical components, your computer, these drives, everything is going to fail at some point. And you really need to be ready for when that does happen. For businesses and especially sensitive files, it's really recommended to have a thing called a 3-2-1 backup solution. So this has been a very old concept, but it's pretty simple. You should have 3 total copies of your files. Any files that you truly cannot live without, ideally you should really strive to have 3 total copies of it. And then 2 of them are on-site and 1 of them should be off-site. That's like a great place to be, and I think that's a really great place for people to strive to. Obviously, if you're just starting out, you don't have to go headfirst into that, especially as you're ramping up and learning all this stuff. It can be a little intimidating. So we can start with at least that 1 offsite backup. But in an ideal world, you have 3 total copies of your data and that you know and understand where every single one of them are. So the easiest place to get started with that, in my opinion, is going to be for that offsite backup. Until you start getting larger and larger, I really think Backblaze is probably the best place to start. They are a very easy to use company that will just back up your computer and unlimited external hard drives for I think like $10 a month, maybe $9 a month, but it's a low fixed cost no matter how many external hard drives you've got. And so I think that that is a great way to get that offsite backup. There are a few different reasons why it's important to have what's called an offsite backup. The first and foremost is if these files are incredibly critical and something happens to your house, there needs to be a way for you to get them even if that happens. So fire, water damage, break-in, whatever, you really want to know that if a file is critical, especially family photos, that it is going to be able to be recovered after an event like that happens. And so that's what an offsite backup is all about. It does also help you from things like, hey, I just deleted the wrong file. Let's go back to it and let's grab it. But really, the offsite backup should be focused on what's called disaster recovery. If something horrible goes wrong in your life, having the knowledge that your computer and all of its critical files and all of its external hard drives are backed up somewhere else is really useful. So what you can do if you're starting out to get that 1 offsite backup, easy enough to use Backblaze. There are other options as well. If you want to, you can set up a sync task with Dropbox and Google Drive, depending on if you've got those storages. Though a lot of those kind of take over your files, for lack of a better term. They try to mess around and be more than just a backup. And so what I generally recommend, especially if you're just looking for a true backup, is to go to Backblaze, because they're not going to try to steal your files and say, hey, by the way, they're not actually on your hard drive anymore. Now they're actually on demand synced and you have to keep paying us. So a lot of stuff that can go wrong there, especially if you're not super IT, like know a lot about how IT set up, where all of a sudden your files are no longer on your hard drive. Now they are on Dropbox's servers only, and you basically have to just stream them from there. So the easiest place to get started is to basically have an external drive, and I really like dedicating a specific drive for a specific task. I love having an external drive that is your photos and your critical photo files. And then this is easy to track of. You can know exactly what it is, and then what you do is you just configure Dropbox on your computer to back up this external hard drive as well as the computer to Backblaze. Now, if anything happens to the external hard drive or your computer or your house, there's an easy place for you to recover these files. It's not going to be instantaneous, but they're there, which is the really important part about all of this. So that is the first place to start. Definitely, it's a great idea to have a full 3-2-1 backup solution. But the thing I really try to stress to people is you don't have to start all the way down the finish line. You don't have to go all out when you're just getting started. Instead, go step by step. You can crawl, walk, run, rather than just trying to start off right off the bat, sprinting and having a full-blown 3-2-1 backup solution with servers and everything. Instead, start with that simple that simple Backblaze backup, and then That's a easy way to get started, and it's not going to break the bank. Then an ideal place to go after that, especially if these are really important files and you want your own control over them, is to have a on-site backup. And this is something that is really easy to do, especially when you're out buying new drives for the first time. I would really recommend buy 2 identical drives. Then get a Sharpie and write primary and write backup on the other one. And then what you can do is there are different softwares out there. For macOS, the easiest one to recommend is Carbon Copy Cloner. And for Windows, Acronis. They both have the ability to have one drive clone another drive. And this can help you get that really good, easy copy of your files. And you can see it, you can feel it, you can plug it into your computer and everything like that. So once you kind of got your good offsite backup running, the next place that's really useful to start is having that on-site backup, that 2 local copies of your files. And what you essentially just do is you get 2 drives, and the second drive can actually be a cheaper drive. Maybe you get a nice, fast SSD for your primary copy of your data that you're actually working on, and you get a cheaper external hard drive that has way more space and is going to be slower for your backups. That's a great place because you're only ever going to your backups if something's gone wrong. Then what you can do is you can just set up a automatic task or a manually scheduled task if you're somebody who's good at remembering to have these calendar reminders and everything like that, to once a week or every day, copy anything that's changed on the primary data, copy that to that backup drive. And that way you get a few things built in for that. One, say you are working on your main drive and all of a sudden you delete the wrong folder or you rename something or anything like that happens. Well, if you've got it set up where you have that kind of time delay, well, now you don't have to worry, oh, has it gone up to Backblaze? Oh, has this happened? Instead, you can literally just pull off the backup drive and copy those files back because you're in charge, you're syncing it. And so that's a really nice thing to have. And so those are 2 great ways to get that kind of local on-site backup and really get there. And with those, you can rest really well about your files being very, very, very well protected. Because now you're covered from multiple ends. And even if something happens to your house, you still have that offsite copy that is your emergency. No matter what happens, you should be able to recover from that. There's a lot more stuff we can talk about with regard to testing backups and making sure everything's good. But the steps I laid out here, I think are a great place for people to start and are great for people who have maybe under 16 terabytes of data and don't need anybody else to access it. So one downside with these drives is the fact that while they're very easy to set up and use, they also only have the ability for one person to be plugged in at a time. That is because they're called direct attached storage. You just plug it into your computer and your computer basically can access the files. Once you start needing more than that, and especially if you've ever worked in an office that has like an S drive that everybody has access to, you go into the bigger setups that are called a NAS. So this right here is a NAS, and it really serves to do multiple things. So a NAS is actually basically a server, technically is a server, that is dedicated towards storage that can have multiple hard drives up front. This one right here happens to be a Synology NAS. There are multiple NAS manufacturers out there, and this is one that I end up working on a lot. And you can put multiple hard drives in here. In this case, this takes 4 hard drives, I believe. Yeah, this is the 4-bay unit. And this allows you to do multiple things. This allows you to do a thing called RAID that actually allows you to have any one of these hard drives fail and you keep all your data, while you also kind of combine all those drives into one big brick of space. There's a ton that we can go over there. I'm going to keep this very short and simple, but a NAS can allow you to do so much more than just an external drive, but now it is significantly more complex from an IT perspective. They can do awesome things, like Synology has an application that will actually let you see all of your photos on your phone and be able to load all the family photos on your phone and share them out with family members and have multiple people access them in so many things. And while those are phenomenal if you need those features, it's also not something that you necessarily need to jump into right off the bat because it is so much more complex. There's so much more that it can do that it does become significantly more complex with it. So when people are asking me, oh, when should I go from having an external drive to actually having a full-blown NAS, the answer kind of comes down to two things. One, do you need to be able to access these files remotely or have multiple people accessing them? Where you can always stick a external drive in your laptop bag, it is very nice to be able to access your files anywhere in the world, and that is something that a NAS allows you to do. And so if that is really critical, and or you also need more than about 20 terabytes of data, that's where it becomes a lot more sensible to really start looking at a NAS. And that is where the world is your oyster. You can get a desktop NAS that can store 200 terabytes of data in it and just be able to store as much data as you can throw at it. And so there are tons of options out there, but in general, if you are somebody who is pretty well IT savvy and you really need those features of a NAS like the increased storage sizes or the ability to share files out and have multiple people working on them, that's when it's really useful to look at it. There is one other option that kind of merges the two, and those are called RAID JBODs. So I'm not going to talk about that too much here, but you can think of that as basically a bunch of hard drives stuck together that act as a single hard drive to your computer. I'm not going to talk about that too much here because honestly, there's not a lot of great ones out there after, who was it? Who went out of business? I'm going to think about it later on, but there's not a lot of great companies out there who make really good JBODs anymore that aren't NASA's themselves, and so I've not had any good ones to recommend. But I think that's a great place for us to kind of end from a really kind of broad overview perspective of managing files. A couple of last minute tips before we get done is one, anytime you're setting up a backup, make sure it's automated and ideally something you can test. A mistake people will often make is instead of using a proper backup software, they will just simply copy and paste from one drive to another. And that is something where you very quickly can get disorganized and duplicate data and a whole bunch of things like that. So if you're going to set up a backup, make sure it's backup software that does it all itself and handles it all for you, because otherwise you can end up with weird file merges and a whole bunch of problems that you would have never had if you just had a proper backup software. Another one is try to stick to just one drive, one source of truth, because when you've got that one source of truth where all of your important files live, it is easy to back up, it's easy to see it that it's backed up, and it's easy to find things. And those are the great places to really start. And finally, make sure that you have your data backed up. If you are somebody who has a NAS or a DAS with RAID, RAID 5 and RAID itself is not a backup itself. Because the way it works is, if you delete a file off of one of the drives, it's actually deleted off of all the drives. RAID is not meant as a backup. It's meant to actually keep you running when there's hardware failures. But just remember, RAID is not a backup. Make sure that if a file is critical, that you can recover no matter what happens. So make sure to have that offsite backup. And then once you kind of got that under control, see about getting that second copy of your data just so you can sleep really well at night. And with that, I think we've got some questions coming on out that I want to go ahead and answer.
All right. Yeah, I think we do have some questions. That was incredible. I always enjoy hearing about that. And I love that you mentioned the 321 backup solution because the Photo Managers has provided a free one pager. I think it's in the chat and it's in the video about the 321. Um, okay, so let's get to the questions. Oh, can you hear me? Are you there, Will?
We can hear you, Rachel.
Okay,
First
great.
question is on the screen here.
Okay, great. Will, somebody asked if you could share the brand of the 24 terabyte hard drive and where to get that.
Yeah, so both Western Digital and Seagate make them. If you're looking for them, look for external hard drives. So there are internal hard drives. That's what this is right here. As you can see, you can't really just plug this into a laptop. An external hard drive is basically going to be this, but with a case around it that allows you to plug it into a power supply and into USB. Basically, so your computer can plug in right in.
Fantastic. I hope that helped and clarify in the chat if it didn't. Could you share what were the two recommendations of software to copy?
Yeah, so one that I've used for years on Mac OS has been Carbon Copy Cloner. It can do a whole bunch of stuff. Great software there. And on Windows, Acronis is probably the best known one. I don't have as much experience with it, but I know a lot of people use it and use it well. And they both allow you to do very similar things.
Terrific. And I think I saw, it might have been Katie that also typed that into the chat. So anybody that needs the spelling on those, because they're kind of funky names, I think it's in there as well. Okay, next question. Don't you copy the whole drive each time you back up? And this would fill up a drive really fast. How do you tell it to just fill the changed or new files? Great question. I bet a lot of people are asking the same thing.
Yeah, and so that's why I really try to stress on use backup software rather than you just copy and pasting yourself, because both the backup softwares I mentioned there will do a thing called a delta backup or a change backup. So what it'll do is it'll look at the two files. It'll look at the one that's on the backup and it'll look at the one on the actual drive, and it's going to see what's changed, and it's only going to copy over what has changed. And so that way you can make sure your backups, you can run them often, because if you've not done a lot that's changed, maybe it runs in 2 minutes,
Right.
but you still always have a mirror. And actually, more advanced ones, I think both Carbon Copy Cloner and Acronis will actually do a thing called versioning for you, where it'll take a snapshot, some magic cool hard drive stuff that can be done with the file system. That'll actually give you the ability to not only just see what your files look like now, but what they looked like 3 backups ago without taking up 3 times as much space.
That's terrific. And I know that you mentioned when you were talking about it, how important it is to have what you call that single source of truth. And I might borrow that. It makes a lot of sense. And to know this is that main collection, and we recommend that for our clients as well. So it's great to hear that from a technology standpoint, but to avoid those redundancies. So to have that software that allows you to just kind of back up. And I assume if a client were to, or if one of the viewers here were to create an edit for a photo, that would be considered a second file, right? So it's really kind of looking at those duplicates.
Yeah, so it'll actually do where even if it's the exact same file name and same everything, but it's changed. So think of like opening a Word document and saving it. It'll be able to detect that change. And if you do have those snapshots and those versions, you'll be able to see how the Word document was at 2 o'clock and at 1 o'clock. So that's
Sure.
a really useful thing to have. And even without going super complex, having that second on-site backup allows you a lot more flexibility, because even if you're not super technologically savvy, that second on-site backup is easy. You can put your hands on it, you can see it, and you know it's exactly what all your files look like the last time you backed up, which is really powerful.
Absolutely. That's great. All right. Please name again the way to copy the whole drive from one to the other to clone it.
Oh yeah, that was both of those softwares, Carbon
Okay.
Copy Cloner and Acronis. Both of them will do the exact same thing, and they have guides themselves. They make it really easy to do. Just click, click, click through, and they will do that for you. And the really nice thing is, you can plug in your backup, and you can look at it, and you can see your files, and it makes it so you know that it didn't mess up. You can check it and see, and you can see all of your critical files on there.
Perfect. So if somebody, that's new and just getting started, essentially they would access one of the software that you recommended. They get an external drive. I know you mentioned the SSD is what you recommend, as we do as well. And they just transfer that the first time, which I imagine would take a really long time. And then they can just kind of follow the instructions to keep that updated. So that's the evolution really of what needs to happen.
Exactly, and that's
Okay.
it's great. And I tell people there's two different types of people in the world all the time. There are people who can do a backup once a week and guaranteed they're going to do it themselves and they're going to be perfect. And then there are people who will do it for 3 times in a row and are going to completely forget.
Oh
If you're
no.
part of the first category,
Yeah.
great. If you're part of the second category, it's important to figure out the way to automate that. And
Sure.
that's a great thing about Backblaze is you can run it automatically. But if you're part of that second category, that's where looking at NASs and things that will handle it all for you is also really valuable, because now you just leave the computer to do all of it rather than you remembering yourself.
Absolutely. Well, and our lives are so busy, and if you can automate some things in your life, it just makes it so much easier. Even if you are tech savvy, let's just get it done.
Oh, yeah.
All right, moving on to the next question. Sandra has said, "Oh, hi, Sandra. I've heard you can't store Lightroom catalogs on a NAS. So how do you share those among multiple users and access them remotely?"
Sandra, you have just really, really struck home with trying to help businesses use Lightroom in a collaborative environment. And quite frankly, Lightroom Classic was never meant to operate off of anything other than an external hard drive. And they never set it up like with Word documents on an NAS, you can have multiple people having it and it's totally fine. Lightroom restricts that out. And especially the way Lightroom works with its actual like kind of full database structure, there's not an easy way to have multiple people being able to access the same Lightroom catalog at the same time. You can use XMP sidecars for synchronization, and actually something that is much better about it is Capture One. But in general, when you're starting out with Lightroom and a NAS, what you essentially do is you still keep your Lightroom catalog. That is basically the edits in that database that's about 200 megabytes for a large Lightroom catalog, as well as your previews on either a external SSD or on a internal computer drive. And then you keep the massive raw files on the NAS. So Lightroom will let you keep your raw files on a NAS, but they won't let you keep the actual Lightroom catalog on the NAS.
Yeah, we've experienced that too. And I know you and I've had those conversations. It's so frustrating,
Yep.
but it is nice to know that the photos themselves and the videos and everything that Lightroom is pointing to can be housed. And that's a big chunk of that storage.
Yeah, I mean, it's like 99% of the space is the actual raw files and videos.
Right. So in answer to Sandra's second part of her question, how do you share those among multiple users? Is your recommendation to put those Lightroom catalogs on an external drive that can be shared?
Yeah, so and this is, I mean, this is every single time I work with photographers and especially with a lot of people, it is always coming up with a custom solution because unfortunately there's no turnkey. This will work for everybody every single time.
Yeah.
If you are, what I'll do for a lot of wedding photographers, for example, is especially if there's a multiple part process, is you basically create a catalog for every single wedding. And then you can just move that catalog file, that backup file, that's about
Right.
100 megabytes around. So the person who's culling the images and doing the first pass of edits gets it, exports it, sends it to the next person, who then downloads it to their computer, opens it, does their pieces, and saves it off like that. And that is really going to be exactly kind of what your setup is dependent. And unfortunately, just with Lightroom, there's that limitation there that it's really not designed to be on anything more than just a single computer at a time.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, that is unfortunate. Let's see what our next question is. Let's see. Yitzi says, I use Beyond Compare to sync folders and drives. Any difference between the drives stand out very clearly? Oh, any differences between the drives stand out clearly? I'm not sure what the question is there, but do you have some comments?
I love Beyond Compare. It's definitely a little bit more, it's much more technically intense than I would say like Acronis Art that are very much first backup programs. Beyond Compare is phenomenal, and it's really useful to kind of check and make sure a backup did occur. if you know it and you know it well, that's another thing I often tell people. Even if there's a better backup solution out there,
Mhm.
if you've got something that you know and you know really well and it's working, you know it. Like,
Yeah,
don't worry about having to do the latest and greatest perfect thing. If you have a
right.
system that is reliable and works for you, keep it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Wonderful. Um, Next question from Sandra. Will Backblaze back up data onto NAS?
Backblaze, you can. The NAS itself has to back up to it, and you no longer qualify for the $10 a month unlimited plan because Backblaze has custom pricing where you pay per gigabyte, or sorry, per terabyte for backing up a NAS itself. And so it will not let you just, hey, map it as a drive and act it like a computer. So
Right.
you can, but it's really up to the NAS to implement a way to back up to an S3 bucket that Backblaze allows you to do. So yes, but it's more complicated than just installing Backblaze on your computer.
Right. And I'll just mention, so for anybody like Sandra who's interested in getting that going, I know Will got that set up for us and we got some Backblaze buckets set up and we have two NAS systems that Will helped us with probably 80 terabytes of data. So it was really nice to have that done by Will and his team to make sure that everything was working correctly and that the security was good to go. So okay, let's see if we have some more questions. All right, from Anne. What would a Backblaze backup look like if used after a catastrophic failure? Would it be an exact reproduction of the computer if installed on a new computer? Great question, Anne.
So what you're looking for is a very specific term. That is what's called a bare metal backup. So
Okay.
there are really two different types of backups. There are what I like to call file-based backups, and kind of what we're talking about there, where you're cloning the drive, you're looking at the folders. Those are all those file level backups. Those are making sure that your files are there. And that is what probably 90% of people are looking for.
Okay.
The one thing that a file level backup does not do is it does not allow you to clone your C drive. So if you took your hard drive out of your laptop, threw it out window, and went to Backblaze, I don't believe that they have a bare metal backup. I'd have to check on that. I
Okay.
believe you'd be able to reinstall all of your programs, but you'd have to reinstall Windows. There are softwares out there that will do what's called a bare metal backup.
Okay.
Acronis will do a bare metal backup of Windows PC. And if you're looking for that for Mac OS, the easiest one to recommend for that is actually Mac OS Time Machine, which is built right into Mac OS. But for the most part, what I was mentioning and really kind of focusing on there were those file level backups that would make sure you kept all your data, but not necessarily the operating system itself.
Terrific. That is really helpful. And I know because we're in Save Your Photos Month right now, and that's why the Photo Managers has generously set up all these conversations. When it comes to photos, though, if you have your photo structure on Backblaze and you upload it that way, you're going to get that same structure, right? So if you did have a catastrophic event, the applications and the operating system and stuff, you probably have to do yourself. But at least knowing that the structure of your files that you've created is going to stay intact is probably comforting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it'd be just like you were to right click download your files. And I believe they'll actually send you a hard drive in the mail with everything.
Yeah. And sorry, I'll just speak on that. We had a client that dropped her 2 terabyte drive, and within 24 hours, Backblaze sent it to her, and it cost her maybe $30. They're a great suggestion. Okay, so this is the last question that we have for today from Anne. Do you suggest that I keep both my Lightroom photos and Apple photos on the same external drive?
So this one's a hard one because while it's great to have that, if you're looking at, hey, should I just use them as the same drive and I'm going to keep my Lightroom photos separate than my Apple photos? Absolutely. External drive is great. And then you also know, back up this one drive. This is my one source of truth. This is everything that's important to me in my life is on this. And it keeps it easy to back that stuff up. If you are asking if you should have both Apple Photos and Lightroom pointing to the same files, so say you've got a bunch of images in a year, month, day format. 2024, 09, what is it? 17. If you have that kind of format and you have Lightroom pointing at it, Lightroom will be very happy with that format, but Apple Photos does not really like to handle external formats. Instead, Apple will take that file and store it in its own format. And so you're not able to have both Lightroom and Apple Photos pointing to the same files on disk. But if you want to keep a Lightroom library and a Apple Photos library on the same hard drive, there's no reason you should not do that. It's just if you're trying to get them to not have duplicates, I'm not sure of an easy way of doing that.
I'm so sorry.
Fantastic. That is great. And I know, well, I'll just throw out a real quick question before we wrap up. So if somebody that's listening wants to get some more information, I know they can watch your channel, which that's in the description under this video, and it's also in the chat. But if they wanted to work with you, do you offer consultations? How do they get started? How can they get going with you?
Yeah, so I'm sure we will put the link to the Hire Us page in the chat. And it's pretty straightforward. I do most of my consulting over Zoom. Share your screen. Now, I primarily set up file servers, so larger enterprises, but it allows us to kind of go through. You share your screen. I request remote control. We go through the files, set everything up, and can manage all of it like that. And so we can get a link in that description. There we go. Thank you for the photo managers. And it's right there. And just fill that out and we will absolutely talk over email.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I know that, as I said in the beginning, our team has worked with you in our business, and it's always such a treat and such a joy. So I'm sure everybody got a lot out of this this presentation. So I want to thank you, Will, absolutely, on behalf of the photo managers, on behalf of me, of course, and my company. I want to thank everybody that came here today. I hope you enjoyed this session. Really want to encourage you to subscribe. These videos, Save Your Photos Month is going on the entire month of September, and it's being hosted by the Photo Managers, which is an international organization that helps photo organizers and helps people like you get all their photos, precious photos organized and memories preserved. Again, Will's channel is in there, and you can download the free 3-2-1 backup method. Again, that's in the chat in the video. Hope you all enjoy the rest of the videos. We'll chat soon. Everybody have a great day.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.